Welcome to another chapter podcast with your hosts, Claire and Rebecca.
Do you love books? Well, you've come to the right place. Join us as we discuss all things books.
Welcome to Chapter 9 of another chapter, the podcast. In this episode, Rebecca and I sit down with fellow Corkhonian Steven O Riordan. Steven is a documentary maker, an activist, and co-author of a book called Whispering Hope. In this book, he discusses the stories of women who were inside Ireland's Magdalene Laundries. It was an absolute pleasure to sit down and talk to Steven about the work that he's done with the survivors of the Magdalene Laundries and where this path has taken him. He began this whole journey by making a documentary after watching a movie, and I won't get into too much detail because Steven will explain it all himself to you. But it is very inspiring to think that there are people out there who are willing to fight a battle for those that they think deserve a break and deserve a win in life. I absolutely loved Steven's sense of humour. It was admirable to see how someone can keep a great sense of professionalism and a great sense of humour whilst dealing with a topic that can be very, very difficult to discuss at times. We really hope that you enjoy listening to Steven, and we'd love to hear what you think afterwards.
So, Steven, for anyone that doesn't know you, because I know you quite well, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Steven O Riordan, and I grew up in Mill Street in County Cork. And from a very young age, I would have been interested in activism and the idea, I suppose, of being active in your local community and maybe representing or advocating on people's behalves. And today I'm going to talk about, obviously, a book that I wrote about the Magdalene Laundries.
Excellent. So do you want us to give us a bit of background about how you got into this particular topic, how the book came about?
Yeah, well, I never really heard of the Magdalene Laundries until I went to college in Bath. And one night I was at home anyway, and I got a phone call from my friend Tim, and he just asked me would I go over and watch this movie, The Magdalene Sisters. And I thought, yeah, feck it, I'll go over and watch it. So I was like, I've never heard of the Magdalene Laundries. I have no idea what you're talking about. So I went over anyway. We were just obviously drinking away, watching it. And I think what I was mesmerised by was the amount of women that passed through the doors of the Magdalene Laundry. And yet at the end of it, we just get the list of women, you know what I mean, that were there, and it was 30,000. And then I became really interested in this idea or concept of, well, where are they now? And if it was so bad, why hadn't someone done something to help these women?
Yeah. And so initially, because obviously I know kind of the work you've done previously, you made a documentary first about the Magdalene women.
Yeah, so when I left college then in Bath in 2006, I just decided to come back to Ireland and just make this documentary about these women. And of course, like every story, I had no real proper experience of making a documentary other than the fact of being trained in college. And I just went on Google essentially and just Googled Magdalene survivors or Magdalene women and just came across all these different forums that had survivor groups, I suppose, set up where women could talk to each other or family members could talk to each other. And I just started to get to know, I suppose, these individuals and these women. And then from that, I met my very first Magdalene survivor, Maureen Sullivan, and she was trying to explain, I suppose, the hardship that she had suffered while she was in this particular Magdalene Laundry in Wexford. And ultimately, she was trying to bring her case to a thing called the redress board. And the redress board was set up for survivors of institutional abuse that were in industrial schools, but it excluded people like Maureen and other women who had a very similar story to her. So suddenly, rather than just making a documentary about Maureen, I was making a documentary about the injustice that she was suffering, and basically me taking on her case or representing and advocating for her.
Wow. And that's really topical even at the moment. Like only today, I was seeing posts on Instagram about, writing to our TDs about the fact that, again, even more people are being excluded from the compensation from this redress board. So it's something that's been ongoing for such a long time. But so how many years ago was it that you got involved in this? So, Stephen?
So it would be nearly, I suppose, 16 years at this stage. So I would have only been about 22 when I started. And again, at the time, I had one survivor, which was Maureen. I was working on her case. I was filming it, documenting it, following her story, her struggle, and I suppose bringing that kind of story to life, as it were. And at the same time, I was trying to find other women that were willing to tell their stories about what happened to them. But the difficulty is that there wasn't that many women out there willing to tell their stories. So eventually I just reached out then to the London Irish Centre in Camden town, and suddenly they had a network of women, of survivors that were, I suppose, part of that institutional abuse, and they wanted to tell their story. So it went from having one survivor to now having 4 survivors. And then I suppose the interesting aspect of it was that these women had never met each other, and one of the women was married for 39 years, Kathleen Legg, and she had never told her husband that she was in this Magdalene Laundry, and she kept her story to herself for 69 years, and we were the first people to hear her story.
That is so sad. Like, I can't imagine keeping stum about something so, dramatic and something that can impact you so drastically, and to not actually have the ability to have a conversation, or the confidence. I suppose the confidence was kind of taken away from them, but to be able to turn around to your partner, the person you're meant to be able to tell everything to, and not be able to say this, it just goes to show how difficult it was.
Yeah, and I think really the issues that we found that the women had ultimately is that people weren't believing them, and that they just didn't have the confidence to tell family members or their husbands or partners, and they just felt society had judged them so harshly that really, I suppose, they just lived in the shadows of Irish society. And this story, while it was out there insofar as the first time you hear about it was in 1993, when 155 women were exhumed in Hyde Park in Dublin, which had a Magdalene Laundry owned by the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity. That's the first time we hear the story of the Magdalene women, and then it becomes this, I suppose, fictionalized film that Peter Mullen obviously directs and produces, and then people begin to realize the harshness of what happened there, because it actually isn't fictionalized; it's based on a true story, and these are real women. And again, that's where I wanted to take up the story, which was, let's tell it from an Irish perspective. Let's see, what we could do from an Irish perspective in terms of bringing this story even further out into the public's domain.
Yeah, I remember going to see the Magdalene sisters in the cinema. I was young enough, and I went with my mom, and I just remember crying so much because I just couldn't believe that something like this had happened, and that people had gotten away with neglect and abuse like this. I was young enough that I was turning to my mom and I was going, is this real or is it not? And like that, when the things came up at the end, the credits and all the, the information about the women that had been there, you'd be in shock because it's something that was never discussed. Like, we'd never have heard about it, only for this. And I was kind of amazed, like, at the amount of people that went to it and must have known something, and people kind of kept quiet.
I think it's even just the fact that people just didn't want to acknowledge it, really. And I would even find when I was making the documentary that ultimately there was really nobody had really interest in that kind of a story at that time, and you kind of struggled to get funding or struggled to get support in any capacity. And I really relied, I suppose, on the skills of other people in terms of cameramen or editors to bring that story together. And even though you commit yourself so much to telling the story and meeting with the women and bringing them out, when we submitted it to the Galway Film Festival, originally it was refused. And I remember getting on a plane over in London, and I thought, I'm going protesting. Like, that's how passionate I was about these women and about this story. And I just remember going all the ways up on the motorway from Limerick to Galway, not a great road. But anyway, we got there and we went into the office and we said we wanted to speak to the Galway Film Festival director, and they were like, oh, he's not available. And then we said, well, we're not leaving until he is available. And they knew like how serious we were like about this story. And we gave them anyway this re-edited version of the Forgotten Maggies, and they watched it. And then 5 minutes later, they came out and said, "We're going to show this documentary at the Galway Film Festival." And within that instant, I knew that by getting it there, that we could then kind of, I suppose, work the media in terms of getting the women's stories out, so it becomes a bigger kind of story or a wider story. And just the reaction at the Galway Film Festival was phenomenal. And the women's, I suppose, the women changed overnight in the context that they were now instantly recognised. So, for example, when Kathleen Legg went back to Bournemouth, where she lived, she told her family that she was going on a holiday to Ireland. Aww. And when she boarded the Aer Lingus plane, in Dublin, one of the stewards turned around and said, "Oh, Joe, congratulations on your documentary. I saw it on the news. You're such an incredible woman." And in that moment, she said, "I have to go tell my family because now the story's out there."
Oh, Jesus, yeah. I've got goosebumps.
I actually have goosebumps. Yeah. I just got them as well. Oh, man.
It's weird. Like, it's so, but I was saying, like, for years, like, looking back at it now, like, that, I suppose at that time, these women felt compelled to tell their story. And even though they had never met each other, they had the one want and one desire, which was they wanted people to hear their voices and to hear what happened to them. And I think I was probably so young and naive and green in the world that, sure, I'll knock down any door or any wall or any barrier because, you know, I want to get these stories out there and I want these women to be recognised. And from that, then the whole thing snowballed within the context of, started off with one woman, then had 4 in the documentary, then it went up to 10. Then we were invited to meet with the Department of Justice for the first time ever. They had never recognised or spoken to any women that were in the Magdalene Laundries, so I set that up. Then it went from that to the women kind of finding their voice, campaigning, other women coming forward, because cleverly, I would say, we put the documentary into counties that had Magdalene Laundries. And one of them was in Waterford, in Dungarvan. And we had just watched it. There was about 200 or 300 people there, whatever it was. Obviously, you're all delighted, standing ovation, and you come out the cinema door. And next thing, this woman, Marina Gambold, bursts through the door, bawling, crying. She says, "I was one of them. I'm a Magdalene survivor. I want to tell my story." And suddenly there was just, you know, I suppose an army of women coming together, and probably at the right time within the context of everything that was going on. Yeah. And we then went up to 25 women. And from that, then we worked on securing the state apology.
That's amazing. Like, what an achievement. To be a part of that is unreal. Like, fair play to you.
Well, I enjoyed it. Like, I enjoyed hanging out with the women, yeah.
Yeah, and it's 10 years since the state apology, is that right?
Yeah, so it'll be on the 19th of February would mark the 10th anniversary of the state apology. And since then, I would have met 165 women in total, or worked with 165 women over the period of 16 years when I originally started. And out of the 165, 47 have passed away.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh my God.
So it was almost going back to that when the state apology happened. It was the importance of recounting and recalling their stories. And while I had made a documentary on it and I was really happy with the Forgotten Maggies and obviously everything it achieved, I was then approached by the Mulcahy Associates in London to write a book. And I was like, I don't write books. I don't do books. I just make documentaries. And
you're in the right place.
Yeah. It was an interesting challenge, like just being asked to do that, really. And I had to really think about it because, so much had happened with the women that I had met, and they had done so much and given so much to the campaign. Did they even want to have their stories recounted in a book, or did they want to even recount all the experiences of what had happened to them again? So that was a real big challenge, writing a book,
What was the process like writing it? Did you find it difficult, or was it made easier by having people around you? Like, did you get an awful lot of support with structuring it and putting it together, or was it all a solo project?
Yeah, no. So originally I was asked to obviously write it, and I said yes to writing it, and obviously, because so many women had come forward, I wanted to try and add something new to the book within the context of women's stories and women's voices. So the difficulty then we found was that I was so close to the women within the context of the relationship that I had with them. The publishing company who eventually won the rights, obviously, for the book, which was the Orion Publishing Company, felt that it was important to maybe separate that out. So what I did was I focused on my parts in the book, so we call it the Stevens chapters, and then we got a ghostwriter, Sue Leonard, to come in and write, we call it the women's chapters. And the idea of that was to keep the story fresh within the context that they're not just talking to me again and they're just recounting the same thing. You have a fresh perspective from it, basically.
That's interesting. And it reads really well. I have it here. Rebecca kindly let me borrow a copy of it. So
very good. Yeah, that's the original one before it became a #1 bestseller.
Oh, yeah? And is it still available, Stephen, or can you get it on an ebook or anything like that at the moment?
Yeah, you should be able to. So the reason it's called Whispering Hope is because when the Taoiseach, before the state apology happened, the Taoiseach met with women that were resident in Ireland's Magdalene Laundries. So it was Enda Kenny at the time. And we were the first survivor group. So at the time, I had set up a survivor group called Magdalene Survivors Together, because obviously it grew bigger than making a documentary. It turned into a campaign, clearly. And so I had campaigned the government to meet with these women because they were refusing to apologise. And I wanted the Taoiseach to meet the women to find out why apologise, the importance of apologising, hearing their stories firsthand, I thought would help. And he was so taken aback, obviously, by the women that he had met through myself. They organised then other meetings of other women that were living outside of Ireland. So they went to the London Irish Centre, who obviously I had met years previously and met other women. And the women there sang Whispering Hope. And one of the women recalled that this was a song that she used to sing to herself when she looked out the barred windows in the Magdalene Laundry. And it was this song that gave her this idea that she would one day get out. So she was whispering hope to herself, because you were never allowed to talk and you were never allowed to make friends in the Magdalene Laundry. So she just whispered hope. So that's where we took the inspiration for the title of the book.
I'm finding this actually very emotional. I'm sorry.
I am as well. I'm having to bite my lip here to be my lip is quivering at different points.
I think what's remarkable there is, for example, Marie Slattery in Whispering Hope is probably one of the real standout stories, because from a very young age she was sexually abused by her grandfather, and she never experienced love or understood what love was. And unfortunately, throughout her life, she then experienced a lot of sexual assault. She was asked at one point, how come it kept happening all the time to you? And that wasn't in a bad way. But what the person meant was that why didn't you say no or stop, or how did it always happen? And she just said, I never experienced love, so I assumed that being raped and being sexually assaulted was a natural way that a woman should be with a man. So therefore, any time somebody raped or sexually assaulted me, I assumed, because it happened from a very young age, that is the way a man should treat a woman. And it's so sad to think that's what she experienced for her entire childhood, right up into her adulthood. And just to see the effect and the impact that had, because obviously there was occasions where she fell pregnant and obviously had the children, and then there was occasions where she lost these children. So she was going through those traumatic experiences, alone, and at the same time experiencing something so hurtful and anguishing within the context of how maybe the baby was conceived. But she's an incredible woman, and You just have to really, I suppose, in my mind, I'm just so inspired by someone like Marie, for example, because while she suffered so much and the hardship of her life is so traumatic, she still powered through within the context of wanting to tell her story or wanting to reach out so that somebody would hear her voice, and that she also wanted to make friends and friendships that she never had. And that was obviously of women that were in the Magdalene Laundry that had similar stories to her or similar accounts to her, It's really astonishing, I suppose, really looking back on it 10 years after the state apology, because, you have another lady that's in the book, Nancy Costello, and she was left in a grotto when she was born. So nobody knows who her parents are. She doesn't know where she's from. She doesn't have any birth certificate. And she grew up, in the orphanages, then went into the industrial school. And one day, because they were doing a fire drill in the school, obviously you were supposed to line up. And she was on a swing. And basically, obviously, her friend went to, go to the fire drill, and the nun came along anyway and pushed her off the swing, and she breaks her front teeth. And then the nun says, don't tell anyone that I did that. And then it's so bad that she goes to the doctor, and obviously the doctor says, how did that happen? And she obviously just blurts out that the nun did this. And as a punishment, she's sent off to the Magdalene Laundry in Cork, the Good Shepherd Magdalene Laundry in Sunday's Well in Cork. And she eventually returns from there, and she goes back up to the convent in Limerick, the only home that she ever knew, and the nuns won't allow her in. So she becomes homeless, and she starts walking the streets of Limerick and basically living homeless. And she goes into the chipper one day because she's so hungry, and she goes to take a chip, and the person hits her hand away. And she goes back up to the convent again, and the nun brings her in this time. But the next day, she lines Nancy and these other women up in a room and brings in a farmer. And the nun tells the farmer to pick whoever he wants. And he picks Nancy. And as a result, Nancy has the most horrific experience with this farmer. Oh, and so much so like that she does everything she can to try and get away, but at the same time, he has a grip on her because the nuns offered her up essentially as a slave to the farmer.
Like how did people get away with this much? Yeah.
It's just beyond belief.
That's it.
An awful lot of it is willful ignorance. It's just people, because that was the way it was for so long, that people just accepted it, and it was easier to stay quiet.
I think as well, Rebecca, a lot of people would not have believed that people of the church behaved in this way, though.
Yeah, and I think I would be of the same view, only that I had stumbled upon the story of the Magdalene Laundries within the context of thinking that about the church and growing up as a young person in Ireland and seeing how dominant the church is and was in school and in everyday life, and how that has slowly, I suppose, been disentangled, even though it's still very much part of your educational life. And we see that even in current situations of what's happening in terms of people holding, physical religious beliefs because they have one belief that seems to dictate everything else, which is very sad. But particularly for women, especially, I think they have been really mistreated, not just by, I suppose, religious institutions, but by society as a whole. And as I think of it, in my mind, we have Mary Robinson being elected as our first female president, and we're opening our arms to the world about how modern and cool and hip we are. And at the same time, we're locking up women because they might be having a baby out of wedlock, or they might have an intellectual disability and the family can't cope, or we want to get rid of somebody because they were sexually assaulted or, raped. And we don't want to talk about that. But all we want to talk about are, the things that we want to show people. And that's it. And those things are the likes of, look at us, we've elected Mary Robinson to the presidency. But yet at the same time that was happening, the last woman admitted to a Magdalene Laundry was in 1991 on Sean McDermott Street. So, and I would imagine most of those women probably didn't even vote in that particular election.
There are no words.
It's actually, we're speechless. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, between the documentary and the book itself, you were very immersed in their stories and getting to know about what happened. Like, how did that impact you as the documentary maker and the writer of their stories, being the one to share their story?
Yeah, I guess because I had grown up with a person that had a disability in my family. So my sister Joanne was born without limbs, and she's only one of 7 people in the world living with a disability, known as Total Amelia. And I suppose from a very young age, I saw advocacy within the context of my own parents supporting and championing someone like Joanne. So learning really from my mother and father from a very young age, and then perhaps taking on that type of responsibility within the context of trying to support Joanne as an older brother to ensure that someone like Joanne who has a disability gets the best possible start in life. And obviously there was always obstacles and barriers to, different aspects of Joanne's life, but yet my parents or myself, my brothers and sisters would just break down those barriers. So going back to seeing the Magdalene sisters for the first time, obviously the first thought in my head was, can we not just do something for these women? So it was an instinctive reaction because of my own family circumstances. And then it became inquisitive within the context of, well, where are they now? Surely there's a modern kind of twist that we can tell to this. And I think the women as well always felt that they never wanted their story to be a sad story. They wanted it to be that they were championing themselves and other women. That was the story they wanted to tell. Whereas a lot of the music you hear from or about the Magdalene Laundries or films or other documentaries, it's very much in the past, or it's stuck in the past, and it doesn't allow the story to move forward into a modern, contextualized piece of, creative, I suppose, art. And that's what I was really interested in. Like, how can you make this story relevant to someone like me who's 22 or to someone who's 44 or someone who's 88? And yes, you've seen the Magdalene sisters, but there's actually a different story here. And that story really is how these women came together or bandied together to raise their voices and allow other women to raise their voices and then achieve. I always remember when I was doing research for the Forgotten Maggies, and I was really obviously dying to get a religious contribution, like from someone that was in the Laundries or a nun or whatever. And anyway, this nun sister just sent to Punty, and this is the true story, so she can sue me if she wants, if she's listening to this. But anyway, she rang me back and she said, but why would you be interested in the Magdalene Laundries story? I goes, I just think it's really interesting. And she goes, you're wasting your time on that now. Like, you'd be better off now going off and getting a law degree and doing something that's far more important than this. And I just remember in that instant with that phone call, that's something that someone says when they don't want you poking around. That's what they say. So then I just always remember my mother being like, keep tearing down those walls. Keep at it. Now, I think maybe after like 10 years of being at it, she was probably exhausted, as in my own mother was probably like, oh my God, the story's going on. But I thought there's an importance to the story within the context that it should be in school books. It should be something that we actively talk. We talk about concentration camps. We talk about breaking away from the British Empire. So why aren't we talking about our own history where we were prejudiced towards these women or children that ended up in industrial schools or mother and baby homes or orphanages? Like, why do we shy away from that? Or maybe that's what every society does. Whereas writing the book, Whispering Hope, was about bringing it to another audience, or, doing the documentary was about bringing it to a different audience. So I'm always trying to think of ways of how do we get the women's stories out there so that other people can hear them,
So, Stephen, is there anything else that you're working on now about the Magdalene Laundries?
Yeah, so this year marks, as I say, the 10th anniversary of that. And 4 years ago, myself and my now husband bought a house. And my parents are always of the view, I don't know how your parents are, but you need to move all your stuff out of the house now because you've moved out of the house indefinitely. So you have to go up into the attic and bring down the 10,000 boxes They should put up there. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, I obviously went
Been there.
up to bring down whatever boxes and stuff, and lo and behold, anyway, I had about maybe 20 boxes of stuff on the Magdalene Laundries. So this would have been notes that I took of women that would have rang me but never really wanted to tell their story, but wanted, to apply for compensation. There would have been audio tapes of women that I met that never had the intention of being in the documentary but wanted to tell their story. And they were saying, if they passed away, that they would like their story to get out there. And so I'm always looking at ways to try and tell other women's stories, or tell the same story again, but in a different kind of way. So I decided that for the 10th anniversary, to mark the 10th anniversary of the state apology, to make a podcast. So the podcast really is just looking back on the work that was done, and then it extends itself to include other women, and it gives you that freedom maybe to be a little bit more, I suppose, expressive and free within the context of what you create, and it's not necessarily hindering in terms of its limitations that you might have for a documentary or a film. A documentary or a book. So yeah, the Magdalenes and I hopefully will be coming out at the end of February, and then that will mark the 10th anniversary, and it will allow people to hear the story again of these women, and again from a different perspective. So it's looking back rather than, I suppose, working with the women or trying to bring the women's stories out. It's kind of saying, this was the work that was done, this was achieved.
So for anyone that actually might want to listen to the podcast, and everybody should, there is a clip here that Stephen has very kindly given us, and we will play that now.
From 1950 to 52, I don't know what happened in Ireland. I don't know what happened in the world. They're lost. I might as well have been dead. And of course I was dead, because I was no longer Mary Croghan. I was Myra, the penitent, the Magdalene and the sheep, the lost sheep. We were called sheep. There's a new sheep arrived.
So, Stephen, how do you go about promoting your work, and do you find it hard to promote as an independent artist?
I think, getting funding for independent artists in Ireland is quite difficult, especially if you're not, I suppose, in the top 5 top 10 people who make stuff in the country, or, your production company doesn't make big productions. But for me, I always just invest my own money, my own time, my own skills. And I'm very lucky that I have a really good job, so I can, afford to buy really good cameras, really good equipment. And, I think that's half the battle, really. I think the struggle is, you'd love to be able to pay other people to do certain elements of your work so that it becomes more enjoyable. But I haven't known any different, to be honest with you. And I think because the Magdalene Laundries topic was the first kind of one that I worked on, it was probably the most difficult to get funding. Whereas since then, I've found it easier to get funding,
Yeah.
There was the bidding war over the book, so that's always a positive sign.
That's amazing.
Yeah, there was 5 publishing companies wanted to publish the book, and we ended up going with the Orion Publishing Company in the UK. Yeah.
5. That must have been very inspiring, though. Like when you met so much resistance to start with the documentary, and then suddenly you've got people literally bidding for another piece of work.
Yeah.
Did it feel good?
Yeah, and we had really good representation from Mulcahy Associates as well in the UK. And I don't, writing a book is so hard. I would say it's so hard structurally. I found it really difficult to get into writing a book and to focus on how to tell the story from, a literacy perspective rather than a visual perspective. And that's my background, and that's what I'm used to, is telling stories from a visual. Whereas this idea of reading the story, I couldn't really figure that out in terms of how do you tell that story, even though someone could argue, but sure, it must be the same as putting a documentary together. I didn't think so. And the other thing I would say about writing a book is I got very lazy. I didn't even get out of bed sometimes. And I'd just be in bed all day writing the book, writing up the chapters.
Yeah.
And then you're like, geez, the day is gone. I've done nothing except write a book. And then you're like, I've actually only written about 4,000 words. This is no good to nobody. So there's a lot of kind of re-editing or reimagining and rethinking of how you tell the story. I remember actually one incident in the book, which has got nothing to do with anything, right? But I think the ghostwriter put in that I had cans of Heineken, and I was like, I would never buy a can of Heineken. It would be a bottle of Heineken. And she was like, it doesn't matter. This isn't me. Like, I don't see me here, you know? And I'm thinking from a visual, if you saw me with a can, you'd be like, that's Steven. So from a literacy perspective, I was like, but he wouldn't do that. Like, you know, the description was off. The description was wrong.
That's interesting.
Or even the tone of your voice is really interesting in a book, I found. Yeah. Just to weave in the stories in such a way that it's one person telling the story, but sure, it was 5 people telling a story.
And did you enjoy writing it?
No, I didn't actually. I wouldn't do it again. And I was asked when I did Joanne's, my sister's documentary, No Limbs, No Limits, I was asked by a publishing company to turn that into a book. And originally I thought, geez, this is cool. Like I could make documentaries on social and human rights issues and then turn them into books and bring it to a different audience. And honestly, maybe it was too close after we wrote Whispering Hope, but I thought, not a chance am I lying in bed for another 12 months writing a book. Like, forget it. I don't have the time or the patience.
So does that mean you wouldn't write another book?
I would write a book if I felt compelled to write a book. I wouldn't go out of my way to write a book.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I think everyone should write a book. And
That's
in fact, everyone should keep a journal and everyone should be active, you know, within writing their thoughts down. And I think it's changed so much anyway in terms of how people sell their stories and sell their books. Like you can do it all online. You can be self-published. You could be seen by somebody, do you know what I mean, online, and suddenly you're instantly recognizable and selling millions of books all over the world. Like, I don't think I'm in that genre is probably what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And are you a reader in general yourself?
Luckily, like, we don't sound convinced at all, and this is the book podcast, and you have to.
Just pretend, okay?
Everybody wants to write books.
It was amazing.
I wanted to be honest with you.
Well, that's good. That's good.
That's fair. Yeah,
it's better to be honest than pretend, and there be an expectation for something that isn't there. Are you a reader, Stephen? Would you read much yourself?
I used to be very good at reading when I was younger, and I loved reading autobiographies or biographies. And I found that since I gotten older, I don't have the time to read as much as I would have. And I find that your spelling capability or, you know, knowledge of the English language seems to deteriorate the less you read.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would. As teachers, I think we can concur that the readers are the ones who tend to be better writers as well.
Yeah.
So what would be your favourite book? Even, you know, a past one or something you'd like to share with an audience who may be looking for a new title?
Yeah, a story that stuck out in my mind when I was working in the Magdalene Laundries was Sophia's story. And it was written by Susan McKay. And it's essentially about this young girl who unfortunately gets abused by her dad, and then the dad systematically abuses all the kids. And eventually we follow her story. I don't want to give it away, but we follow her story and we see what happens. And I just found the end of that book just the most compelling, jaw-dropping, mouth-open scenario because of all the things that preceded, you know, the book coming to an end, essentially, and the story being told.
Okay.
Book that really affected me that I had to put down and couldn't read it again was The Little Prisoner by Jane Elliott, I think it is. And again, it was an abuse story of this young girl, and it's the only time where I've ever felt that I couldn't finish the book because it was so graphic and so detailed and obviously so horrendous what happened to that young girl. Like, and again, through a person that was older than her and obviously took advantage of her. And the reason I'm saying these books is because they were books that when I was working on the Magdalene Laundry topic, I went out of my way to read books that would be insightful to me for a world that was inhabited by individuals who felt suppressed or shamed within the context of what happened to them. And, seeing then how their story unfolds and how does that match to other people's experience? Is it all different, or is there similar paths crossing over into each other in terms of themes and ideas? And then my favorite book that I would highly recommend for anyone to ever read is June Goulding's The Light in the Window. And I'm saying that because she was a writer from Kanturk in Cork, and she was a nurse in the mother and baby homes. And she arrived as a nurse thinking that she was going to change all these women's lives. And she finds herself, in the thralls or the throes of the religious orders, and the story that unfolds is absolutely breathtaking. And I've always felt it should be turned into a movie.
Are all of those books factual? Or
Yes.
are any of them kind of fiction based on fact?
No, all factual. Yeah, I just love reading true stories and immersing myself into somebody else's world, and just taking yourself on that journey and almost trying to experience, what this person felt at that time, and seeing, what you could take from that, or if there's any learnings from the book that you read, or how it inspires you to kind of live your everyday life or to understand life a bit better. Because I think sometimes we have a habit of going around in our rose-tinted glasses and maybe just not consuming ourselves in other topics or subjects that are just as important and that we should be aware of and understanding of. And then my husband Mark would be obsessed with crime fiction. Would constantly read, always find time to read. I'm so jealous. I'm like, I don't know where he gets the time to read.
Audiobooks, Stephen. Audiobooks.
You can always make time for reading.
You love audiobooks right now. Oh yeah. So a book he loves is 13 by Steve Kavanagh.
Great book.
The serial killer isn't on trial. He's on the jury. You've got Her Last Breath by Linda Castillo, I think it is. And then, this must be mine, that can't be Mark's. Mary Higgins Clark, Daddy's Little Girl. That's something I wrote. We're big enough readers in our house.
Good. Well, you read a wide range between you, so by the sounds of it, which is good.
Yeah, I picked up Hillary Clinton's book, was What Happened, and I got to page 4, and I was like, I'm actually sick of what happened because it's everywhere, so I didn't finish it. And I think that's the worst thing nowadays, is that I buy books and I don't finish them.
Okay.
So I don't have the time to finish the book because, well, I don't know about me, but I like to read a book in a certain place, in a certain way, at a certain time.
Okay.
And the book has to consume me, and I'll give it 20 or 30 pages depending, or do you know what I mean? I can't go beyond that then, because there's only so much information I can consume in that book. But then I feel I get so busy, I'd love to take the book to work and read it on, let's say, on my break, but I wouldn't feel that my brain would consume that book on my break, if that makes sense.
That's fair.
Yeah, I get you. I get you, yeah. And that's fair. So it's a very ritualistic thing for you, which is nice too, because if you are reading, you're specifically dedicating time just to the reading, nothing else. That's all you're focusing on, and that's a really nice thought.
I feel like I'm basically becoming a book apologist, and I'm just apologising for my lack of reading.
Look, you have a published book. You can apologise for your lack of reading all you want.
Do you think that writing a book has put you off reading a book? Like, has put you off reading a bit, even?
Oh, Jesus, that's a great question. No, maybe. No, I don't know, actually, to be honest with you. I honestly did find, and I don't want to lie, I did find writing the book Whispering Hope really difficult. I honestly did. And I found it really difficult to go back in time myself and try to remember, I suppose, the story from that literacy perspective, as in, if you read it, what are the words that you're hearing in your head? Whereas I would just be a visual person. So if I can see it and it draws me in, then I'm all about it. But if it isn't drawing me in from a reading perspective, then I have no interest in finishing the book, no matter how good the book is. I'm like, whatever, it's not compelling me. Or then, as I was saying with The Little Prisoner, the book was so prescriptive that it was too much for me, so I had to put the book down.
Yeah. Maybe you need to try graphic novels.
As in pornographic novels, or
No. Without the porn, just the graphic. You've no idea how many of our episodes get these dirty comments thrown in. It's actually hilarious.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I'm being book shamed here now a little bit, so I'm going to
Not at all. Step
up my bookagram and read more. That'll be my promise for you for 2023.
There we go. If it's so, because obviously you are more visual so than we'll say the written word. If someone was to make a movie of your life, Stephen, what would you call it, or what would they call it?
Jesus, a movie about my life, and what would it be called? The Activist. That could be a good title.
Yeah,
that would be a brilliant title. Yeah.
Yeah.
And who would play you?
And then who would play me? Well, Ryan Gosling, is it? Or Ryan Reynolds?
Obviously,
either or.
Yeah.
Everyone says I look like Messi, but I don't know if he can act.
Maybe in Portuguese. No, I was about to say Portuguese, but that's the wrong language.
He's huge in Argentina.
Yeah, well, we could dub Messi.
Yeah. I always felt that the Whispering Hope book actually was potentially a great film, because it's got so many central characters with the women. I mean, not because in the book, I'm talking about the women and the women's stories and how they've come together. But then I suppose you could argue that Philomena Lee kind of, or Philomena, covers that kind of angle of, an advocacy type book, like searching for something. But I'd say I belong.
Well, there's always room. There's always room for these kinds of stories, though, because they are so important.
Absolutely.
You can't play down the importance of telling another story like this.
Yeah, and I think what I find really interesting is the amount of people, for example, in Belgium, they turned Whispering Hope, obviously the book, into a musical.
What?
I was like, oh my God, the book's going to be a
Are
musical.
You serious?
Yeah.
How did that work?
Yeah. I have it here. Like, look.
How?
Did you see it?
Yeah. Oh my God.
They called it Magdalena. Yeah.
Oh my God. A musical, not even just a play.
Yeah. Did they stick to the stories, or did they take artistic liberty?
I think they did a lot of what their own. Basically, I got an email. I'm going to say 2015 or 16, maybe 17. So I emailed them back anyway, and obviously it's a fully fledged, proper professional production, but it was younger people. Like, there was obviously kids, because obviously they're trying to depict young people going to the laundries, and then older people and the nuns and the parents, all this anyway. So it took all the story into account. And they said, oh, look, do you want to fly out for the opening night? And I thought, yeah, grand, it'll be in a garage somewhere with 10 people in the audience, and sure, it'll be great crack, right? But in actual fact, the main actors were basically the equivalent of our Fair City actors, as in they were that famous, that kind of way. Like, they were the Coronation Street actors, or Emmerdale, or EastEnders. So I was like, this is brilliant. And then I was in the audience, but sure, it was in a foreign language, so I had no idea what was being said. So they wrote the script in English for me so I could follow the script. But then what I thought was really remarkable, which I said to them after, is that the music hit me so much in terms of the language that I was completely blown away by their interpretation of the story and the story that they were trying to tell. So they sent me anyway. I have the original soundtrack, and it's just these people singing in a foreign language, but it's amazing. Wouldn't you love just turn it into an English musical?
I was laughing at the concept of it being a musical initially, because it is such a serious topic. Yeah. But obviously it sounds like they did actually a really decent job, as in a really respectful job. I can't believe I didn't know about this, and we've been friends for how long? Many, many, many years.
What was it kind of like Les Mis? It's about a very serious topic, but the narrative fit in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
I don't really, I went over there, and I did love it, obviously, but I didn't really know what it was. And it's kind of, when you go to these things, you don't know what to expect. And then I was kind of taken aback by how great it was. The theatre itself, we'll say, was the size of the Cork Opera House. So it wasn't a joke.
Yeah.
And then they're like, yeah, it's sold out for 10 nights in a row. And I'm like, sorry? They're like, yeah. It was really good. I have to say, Magdalena was amazing. Like, honestly, I think Les Mis is an exact comparison way to look at it. They show like how the women got into the laundry, the friendships they build, and then they sing a song. Well, see, I was thinking more Dolly Parton, 95, the musical. And I was like, but how are they going to be like, tumble out of bed and stumble in the kitchen? Like, it's not going to be that, surely,
But I suppose it's just the way different people work artistically. Like the same way that you were more than happy to come up with like visual representations of something and found the book difficult in a way. Do you know, in a way, you wrote the book, but you still found it a difficult process. Someone else would find coming up with a musical, a much easier thing to do than make a documentary about the same thing. So it's just, yeah. God, that's amazing.
But isn't it amazing though how someone can just come up with a concept like that I wouldn't have thought of it as a musical.
Yeah.
I think I should start a campaign. Yeah, I should start a campaign to bring it to Ireland.
You should. I'd go. I would go.
You should. I want to see this.
I'd love to hear the whole thing in English, like.
That would be an experience.
Well, yeah, once it wouldn't be something that people thought was disrespectful.
Yeah. People over the years then would contact because they're writing thesis or PhDs or doing a research project and all that. And then they want to obviously quote the Whispering Hope or quote the Forgotten Maggies, or then to do a direct interview so they have a direct source, I suppose is a better way of explaining it. And I like doing that then as well because it's nice to know that other people have been inspired by your work or what the women did, of course. And then I've done a lot of schools around Ireland, which I love going to the schools in Ireland. Like, I love talking about the work that I did with the Magdalenes. And you'd be very surprised at the amount of people that would find it interesting at that age, because I think maybe nowadays most young people have just a lifestyle that doesn't necessarily reflect even our generation in terms of our age. And then if you go back even further, which is obviously our grandparents' age or our parents' age, it's almost an alien concept. So they find it fascinating that a young fella took on these women's stories, and obviously they're relating to that point, that a young person did this. And my story to them is that take on an issue, take on something in your local community, be active, be out there and be kind of like seen, and that everyone has something that they can offer their community. And this was me offering something to my community, even though the women didn't come from Mill Street or I'd never met them, but I was offering something in terms of an Irish kind of context,
So, Stephen, are you interested in doing a quick fire round? It's kind of either or questions.
Shoot.
Great. Okay. So, would you rather read an amazing 1,000-page book or watch a terrible 1-hour movie?
Watch a terrible 1-hour movie.
Would you prefer to bookmark a book or dog ear it?
Both are disgusting.
What's wrong with bookmarking a book?
But I've got it. This is the bookmark.
Like, to see my books, are any one of them bookmark or dog mark? You leave your book looking pretty as you bought it in the shop, and be careful when you're reading a book, it's precious.
But a bookmark is just like something you put in.
Shameful. You should know the page you're on.
Oh. Do you know how many books I'm reading at the moment?
That's actually what I do as well.
Really?
So yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah.
See,
before I close it, I'd be like, page 52.
Yeah, but you've got an amazing
excitement
memory.
of opening up the book and finding the page that you're on and then going, oh my God, this is the page I was on. Whereas the bookmark, kind of ruins that for you.
Or I was like, surprise, you were actually 50 pages behind here and you missed a whole section of the story. That's what would happen to me.
Okay, I think I know the answer to this one. Would you rather read non-fiction or fiction?
Oh, non-fiction, day in, day out.
Okay. Would you rather write a wildly successful one-off book or make a few minorly successful documentaries?
I think write once-off book. I love the idea of being like a #1 best-selling author. It's just something really sexy about it.
Okay, very good. Would you rather love a book that everyone else hates or hate a book that everyone else loves?
I would generally be the hate the book that everyone loves. I'd be like, why are you reading that? Like, no interest. Like, I can't get the Harry Potter phenomenon. It drives me demented. Like,
That's a fair example of that answer, in fairness. Borrow or buy?
oh boy, Jesus, it's like going to the theatre. Don't ever buy a cheap ticket. You go all out. Well, look, borrow obviously if you have to, of course.
Okay, fair enough. Macra or score?
Oh, score till you die.
Dublin or Cork?
Cork. Because you know what I was thinking there was that before, I don't know about G, right, but before lockdown, I would have said I was quite independent within the context of just living my own life and doing my own thing, and then obviously checking in every now and then with either my friends or my family. And what I would say is that since lockdown, not to be dramatic or sad in any way, I would feel that I'm actually more drawn to going back to family and actually having family experiences and family, get-togethers and then friendships as much as you can. And I think we actually took everything really for granted pre-COVID, and it's actually really good and really nice to kind of get back to your roots. So that's why, because I love Dublin, obviously I love living here with Mark and I love the life that we're building, but I think home is where your heart is really, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Were Ross and Rachel on a break?
No.
Okay. And the last one, can you see me now?
I can see you now, and I've seen you all my life. She is referencing a play that we were in years ago, and we got to the All-Ireland final for score, and I had to land a plane, and the Queen was coming to visit Cork. It was all based on the Queen coming to Cork. And what happened was the airport had shut down and there was no staff around, so the two cleaners had to land this plane. And I think one of the best jokes in there was that she says that she's 8 minutes, whatever it is, to land the plane. And I said, well, you took 800 years to get out of this country. You can at least wait 8 minutes to get back in now. So it was all these political kind of innuendos, that literally brought the house down in Killarney and the Gleneagle. Like, how we lost Rebecca, I'll never know.
I know, Tyrone robbed us. Absolutely robbed us. So they did.
Yeah. My mother's always like, Stephen, you have so many things. Like, you wrote the book, you made a documentary, but you never got a gold medal for the All-Ireland. Jesus. That's hard.
You did get a national title in public speaking, though.
I did, which I hold very dear to my heart, yeah.
Yes,
and
I have mentioned before.
Or whatever it is. Or was it best? Yeah. I have all those awards still.
You do. And myself and Stephen, in the same year, Stephen represented our area in Mr. Personality from Accra, while I was Miss Blue Jean Country Queen. You were also robbed that year, Stephen, in fairness. I was not.
I was funny. I sang a song.
Did you win, Rebecca?
I did not win. I came nowhere near it, and rightly so.
We had a very good night.
Before we go, Stephen, is there anything else you'd like to add that we maybe haven't covered?
No, thank you for having me on, and congratulations on the success of your podcast. A lot of work has gone into it. If
people are looking to find you online, Stephen, either the documentary, the book, and your socials, what are they, and where can they seek you out? Yeah, so Instagram is Steven O R_, and then it's the exact same for Twitter. And I use Twitter and Instagram mostly, really. Facebook is a bit redundant, unfortunately, now. So yeah, anyone wants to follow me, anyone that wants to reach out, more than happy to even answer more questions or follow up and stuff that people may have in terms of questions. So thank you so much for both having me on, Claire and Rebecca, and best luck with your podcast going forward. And best luck with yours too.
I really hope that you've enjoyed listening to that as much as what we did. As you can tell, we did have a bit of fun during the recording. The discussion was very interesting, and it was important for us to consider any further reading that people might want to take part in following on from this episode. So if you've listened to previous episodes, you might remember that Rebecca got to sit down with Aoife Cassidy, who is on Instagram at Little Cass Reads, and as part of their chat they also recorded a segment for this episode where Aoife recommends books that people can pick up if they want to explore the topic in further detail. So I'm going to hand you over now to Aoife, who will discuss these books in further detail with you.
here are a few books that I recommend. Bessborough by Deirdre Finnerty. Belonging by Catherine Corliss. Against the Tide by Dr. Noel Genn. Republic of Shame by Caelan Hogan. My Name is Bridget by Alison O'Reilly. In the Shadow of the Eighth by Dr. Peter Boylan. The Adoption Machine by Paul Jude Redmond. Mother and Child by Lindsay Erner Byrne. Oh Captain, My Captain by Jennifer Horgan. That last one is on the Irish education system. And then there are a number of fiction books, which I'd also recommend. So that list that I've just read out, they were all non-fiction, but there are a few fiction books on the subject which are really interesting too. So I've got I Couldn't Love You More by Esther Freud. Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. Waiting for the Miracle by Anna McPartlin. The Light in the Window by June Goulding. The Secret Scripture by Sebastian Barry. The Paper Bracelet by Rachel English. And A Second Life by Dermot Bulger. And then there is also an academic book, which you're probably aware of already, called Redress. And it's about Ireland's institutions and transitional justice. And it's by Catherine O'Donnell and James Smith and Maeve O'Rourke.
Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like and share to keep the book conversation going. Thank you to Helen Becerra for the graphics, Mark Neville for the mixing, and to each of our contributors. Music is Make It Work by All Good Folks.
Don't forget to follow along on Instagram at Another Chapter Podcast. We'll see you there.